So two thoughts. First, why are the stormtroopers such horrible shots? Like, I know that's become kind of a meme and a joke, but at what point did we embrace that? Like, at what point did the actual writers embrace that? Second of all, are they actually trying to kill Sabine for being a graffiti artist? Is that where they're going with that? I do like the fact that they kept the tie. Continuing our whole continuity thing, I'm with that. So that's awesome. I also like. I immediately thought of the idea of a modern Star Wars TIE Fighter style game, and like having custom skins for your tie and being able to change it up and vary it and stuff like that. That's just a great idea that will never ever actually happen because EA is the only one who can make Star Wars games. But I mean, after I take over the world, I'm sure we'll put that into place. Moving on. I also like the Stormtroopers' comments on it. That's not regulation. I kind of like it. So I do like Tarkin's preparations here. He sends an all-clear signal regularly. If he doesn't, there's a problem. Come check it out. That's actually pretty standard military protocol, especially in a high-priority system like Mustafar. So that makes sense. It's just amusing to me that that's what was required, rather than anything else indicating the massive electrical explosion, or the massive disruption of the ship, or the sudden lack of communications, or just looking out the window. It's literally visually listing. Speaking of which, while I'm complaining here, why does a Star Destroyer, a ship, have giant, massive, open, cavernous areas that have, giant exposed power cores and thin platforms leading over it with no railing? Yeah, I know that's also kind of a Star Wars thing, but at least in most places where that's usually a thing, it's on a planet, or in the Death Star, or something, not a ship. I mean, moving on. So, there's this one bit where they're talking about how much effort they're putting into rescuing Kanan. One of the things I find interesting is that no one else seems to recognize the inherent value of Kanan. He's one of the only remaining, if not arguably the only remaining, of the old Jedi. Now, obviously, he's not. But, as far as they are aware, he is the only remaining of the old Jedi, someone who actually trained in the Old Order. And he can use the Force, and he can use it pretty well. Those are astonishingly valuable traits that would put him as a high-priority target for both sides. To me, it just seems absolutely logical that they would throw as much energy and effort into this as they do. Oh, and he's family too, I guess. I guess that's relevant. I also love the way I should say, Kanan in specific, actually uses the blaster saber. Or the saber blaster? The sabler? The blaster? I'll workshop that one a little bit. In the fight with the Inquisitor. It's pretty good, and it's good choreography. Which doesn't surprise me, most of the Clone Wars had pretty decent choreography too. Note the Inquisitor is actually legitimately enjoying his fight with Kanan. Finally something worthy of my time. And when Kanan flat out says, I have nothing left to fear, the Inquisitor smiles, like probably one of the most genuine smiles he's ever given, and salutes him before actually going back to fighting him. Little tidbits like that are why I like the Inquisitor. I'm going to go ahead and assume that he's dead at this point, because I know from future stuff that there's going to be future Inquisitors as opposed to him. And so I find myself thinking, I don't think they're going to measure up to him at all, because he did get these little moments every now and again that helped to differentiate him from just a completely typical Sith. And if anything, I kind of wish we saw more of him. So, of course, Kanan doesn't actually kill the Inquisitor. Yeah, I know, it's a kids' show. And you can't show the good guys killing in a kids' show. That's actually a rule in some studios. That's a thing. So I imagine that's at least part of the mentality here. But what I find even more interesting is the Inquisitor decides to willingly die, because in his own words, there are worse things than death. He would rather die than fail. And given who his masters are, yeah, no, I'm with him. I would probably choose the same thing. That's, of course, assuming he's actually dead. We all know this is Star Wars, and someone falling from a great height almost never kills them. Occasionally it does, like twice, I think, so far. Something like that. And, of course, Tarkin is told, we need to evacuate. I have expected Tarkin to say, in a moment of triumph, just as a random, fan servicey thing. But he didn't. Apparently he never took this lesson to heart, though. Pity. So I gotta admit, as much as I do like this episode and this series in general, them escaping in a tie kind of irritated me. I've flown ties before. You know what they are? One-hit wonders. In other words, they have the ability to take maybe 3 hits if those are glancing hits, and that's probably about it. And they have an entire swarm coming after them. At least when they were in the transport ship, they'd had shields and armor, and, I could kind of buy it. But a tie? Come on. See my earlier comment about the Stormtrooper thing. Now, I also kind of am amused by the fact that the rebels can only really spare like two transport ships and 3 corvettes to save them. It makes sense, though. After all, again, and this is something I've been hitting this whole time, this is still the rebellion when they are very small. And I want to segue something. So you guys are probably irritated at me at the fact that I keep pointing out the whole ship discrepancy thing. The fact that I wish they hadn't revealed the ISDs earlier, that the first ISD should have been Tarkin's ship. Well, I haven't been doing that just to complain. One of the things I say very often is I don't like to criticize without critiquing. In other words, how I think it could have been done better. And what's funny is this episode could have been a perfect cap to that. They go through this whole thing, and the first time they ever see a major Imperial ship is the ISD Sovereign. ISD-1, if you want to be very specific. And that's Tarkin's personal Star Destroyer. He shows up with that, and things get serious. Then, at the termination point of this episode, the rebels, through their various cartoony machinations, manage to take down the Sovereign. Now, I know, I get it. The implication is that I'll show you how powerful the Force is, and the Force effectively guided the Inquisitor's lightsabers to take out just the right thing, and I get that. Point is, the rebels, this rebel group that's based in Lothal, or however they pronounce it, has now managed to take down a Star Destroyer. Everything else they've done is peanuts, really. A few ties here and there. I think like 1 cargo transport that was carrying the Kyber crystals, and of course a couple of, not ATSTs. That's about it, really. Maybe half a dozen, or maybe a full dozen troopers. Nothing significant. But they just took out a Star Destroyer. And that's a big deal. Those things are very expensive, very powerful, and very large scale. Now that's important. Because, as the episode actually shows, this is now them becoming an actual threat. They have now become sufficiently a problem to be on the radar of much worse things. And the episode closes with Vader showing up. Now that all works great, except for the fact that the ISD thing is almost kind of a casual throwaway because of how the ship wasn't really used properly up till this point in the series. Little things like this is why I make these comments and try to show how things could be polished more and presented better. Either way, seeing Vader back was awesome. I will freely admit that. And, of course, the only thing I would change about that scene is maybe make the Agent ISB guy kind of be like, because, one of the whole points was that Tarkin was always one of the only people who wasn't terrified of Vader. Just a side point there. But you're probably wondering why I haven't commented on it yet. And yes, it turns out Fulcrum was Ahsoka. I was actually wrong. I was assuming Fulcrum was Organa this entire time, or possibly Leia, since we know Leia at this point in history would be 15. She would be the same age as, I can't even think of his name, Ezra. She'd be the same age as Ezra. But no, it was Ahsoka. She doesn't really have much to do here. It's more of a fan servicey kind of a thing. But again, it fits the theme, so I'm okay with it. Because Ahsoka is larger scale than these rebels are. I mean, so is Organa, but you get what I mean. We have more political connections thanks to Organa connecting them to the cells, and we have more personal connections, or personal power now, thanks to Ahsoka being involved. And they're going to need Ahsoka because they've gotten the attention of Darth Vader. Yeah. Final thoughts for Season 1. I liked it quite a bit. In fact, I liked it enormously more than Clone Wars Season 1. One of the comments I got most often as this show was coming out was how it was very lackluster and very stupid and God, it's worse than Clone Wars. When I mentioned how I recently asked people what they thought of the show, most people had changed their tune a little bit, that they said that it gets better later. But I find myself looking at this, and I know this is going to sound so strange, but I was really enjoying myself. Now, that probably sounds insane to say that, because, I mean, don't you enjoy most of your stuff? Well, yeah, but I mean, I was getting into it for the most part. I usually don't when it comes to stuff I watch. Like when I have analysis mode on for a full rumination, I try to block everything else out. I got my notepad and whatnot. But when it comes to shows, for that's not a good way to put it. Let me use a direct comparison. Clone Wars. When I was going through Clone Wars, I usually had a game I was playing at the same time. Because Clone Wars was enjoyable enough, and I had a few things to talk about. But for the most part, it was just kind of like, yeah, all right. But this felt more like, and I'll use a direct comparison for myself, this is more like watching Star Trek for me, which, with the exception of a few episodes, usually has my attention sufficiently that I can focus on it entirely and not, feel like I need to do something else at the same time. Not a complaint, actually, quite the contrary. That's one of the biggest praises I can give to a TV show, which is why I'm really confused here, and I hope I didn't just lose all my viewers by praising this. Regardless, we had a very strong start with Season 1. I'm going to go ahead and go plunk the money down for Season 2, and we'll see how it goes from here. See you around, guys.